While you're settling in, I wanted to make a public service announcement from one of our new friends here. There is a free movie at the Thornbury Library tonight, Billy Bishop Goes to War. There are free tickets. It starts at 6:30. It's an award-winning Ontario movie, and so I hope you will check that out. If you're looking for something to do tonight, something cultured, head on up to the Thornbury Library. Thank you. There's also a Blue Jays game, yeah. But Billy Bishop, he's pretty great. Blue file. Okay, you're up.
Okay. Again, folks at the back there, anybody who wants to come in?
Don't you?
Give you the 30-second timer. How's everything going so far? Good breakout sessions? Dynamite, eh? So, oops. Did I do that?
So what's going to happen? Are they going to introduce us and then I just go up?
We ready to go?
We're ready, Bruce.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone, to our final plenary session of the afternoon, Bringing the Corridor to Life. I don't know if everybody had a chance to meet our speaker. Well, everybody knows Jarvis. I think most of you met Carolyn Thickett, who is our conservation manager at the ECA. Welcome, Carolyn, our newest addition, and just been huge to have you with us here. And Jim Dobbin, and I'm going to introduce Jim a little more completely in a moment, but suffice it to say, what you're going to see over the next 30, 45 minutes or so is going to have Jim's fingerprints all over it. Jarvis asked me to kick this off with a little origin story about the early days of the ECA and how we got things going. And so while the work of several of us dates back decades, in particular with respect to Castle Glen, the birth of the ACA came in late 2021 when I think it was 6 soon-to-be directors. There was a marketer, a tourism expert, a lawyer, and a few business people. We were sitting around on a gray day trying to figure out who and what we wanted to be. And what we wanted to be called as well. But that's a story for another day. But suffice it to say, if you go back to the merch table, there was no T-shirt big enough to handle something to do with a mad, noisy, pretty silver beaver or something like that. I know we had a lot. We were trying to get all the rivers in there, and I tell you, it wasn't going to work on the T-shirts. But names aside, a couple of things were very quickly apparent to us. The first thing we knew was that we knew very little. We had very limited knowledge of ecological corridors, but would soon serendipitously discover that they were rapidly emerging as one of the go-to tools for land conservation around the globe. And I say this with absolute humility because as you've seen here today in this great space, we've been surrounded by some of the brightest minds in conservation, ecology, related science, and corridor creation from across Canada. So it really has been quite something. Jarvis and I earlier this year went out to Banff and where Parks Canada, Christine Drake, where's Christine? If you haven't... Christine's at the very back there from Parks Canada. Christine and Jody of the Y2Y hosted an amazing Ecological Corridors conference, and we were very humbled to be there. So we didn't know that much. But the second thing we knew was that we didn't care what we didn't know because we shared a common vision of what we wanted to accomplish and the requisite passion to make it happen. So before long, we had honed in on this simplified capital H, as shown here to describe our area of focus. It wasn't perfect, but a few things did jump out. We knew it was conceptual at best, but it did seem intuitively logical to us. We had heard from experts that these were the highest conservation value lands at scale in proximity to the GTA. And that matched how we felt about the area as well, so we felt good about that. We also thought, okay, well, this is a starting point here. And we knew it was inevitably going to evolve. It was going to fill in, expand, et cetera. And that remains a point that I'll say is still valid today, and we've learned is that corridors are never static. They're always going to change, and the networks are going to change over time. And the third was we needed to back all of this up with science if we were ever going to gain legitimacy with some of the key conservation, political, and financial stakeholders that we were going to have to work with. Before moving on, I'd like to just go back to the H for a second. I want to dispel some nasty rumors that the H symbol had any pretensions regarding family legacy here. That is just false here. But there is one truth that I would like to say. We do happen to live right adjacent to the Bruce Trail. And I have 2 daughters, and they always thought when they were growing up that I had a trail named after me. And the truth is, I did not dispel that rumor there. But a fun fact, speaking of the name of the Bruce Trail, Michael's still here? Is Michael McDonald still here? Or he might have had to leave for the CEO of the Bruce Trail. The Bruce Trail gets its name from the Bruce Peninsula and Bruce County, which were both named after James Bruce, the 8th Earl of Elgin. He was a Governor General of the Province of Canada from 1847 to 1854. So now you know. Okay. Oh, hang on a sec here. Where are we going here? Don't need that yet. There we go. I spoke earlier about some of the good fortune that has followed the ECA through our brief history and events like this. Well, one of the big critical strokes of luck that we encountered, and I believe luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. But for us, we got very lucky when one of our founders, Mike Robbins, who you met earlier, introduced us to James Dobbin. Jim is a world pioneer in strategic spatial development planning. His original and visionary research at Harvard in the mid-1970s propelled not only others, but his own private sector career, leading Dobbin International, where he and his team have led well over 100 complex, large-scale projects for clients like the UN and World Bank, many of them at the country scale. If we needed some scientific and technical skills, we found the right guy. This is incredible, being here in Collingwood and being able to tap into this kind of talent here. I want to turn it over to Jim to lead off some of the amazing work that he's been doing, and then Jarvis and Carolyn are going to carry on with how we've gone from the H and where we go from here as far as some of our scientific work goes. Then we're going to wrap it up. We're going to bring up all of our moderators here, and you're going to be able to ask us any questions about anything you want, and we'll take it from there. So let's give Jim Dobbin a great big hand. Thanks, Jim. There you go. Jim, was the H not scientific enough for you?
Actually, you did a great job. It turns out it was very close to what we found after doing intense work for about 6 months. So congratulations. Well, thank you very much, Bruce. I'm really delighted to be here, and we've got just a few insights of this great project that we undertook last year. We started last July in 24, finished around Christmas, and I think that if I can just go here, last year at the summit, I presented this map. We were just starting the project, but just look at that region. You've got the Greenbelt or the Niagara Escarpment. Okay, the Greenbelt, the Niagara Escarpment in orange. And look at all the rivers that are flowing out of the escarpment. Look at the ANSIs these are areas of natural scientific interest, the yellow areas. They're just scattered all over the landscape. ANSIs are really important areas that are not protected and they're not connected. We also have the forests in green and we have the wetlands in blue. And the region is 185,000 hectares. It's defined by the watersheds. The watersheds are basically a natural boundary crossing administrative counties, Grey County, Grey Highlands, and Simcoe, crossing also the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority and Grey Sauble. But it's a natural boundary. Since we're looking for ecological corridor, we need to have natural boundaries to start with. It's also a subset of the Georgian Bay Geopark. So this fits within part of the geopark. So that's where we started, and at that time I said, this is a very complex landscape. It's going to be very complicated, and I really was an understatement, because it is even more as we got into the details of it. So I just, so how do we, I'm going to highlight some of the findings that we had about the landscape, about the watersheds, some significance about the watersheds, land use, land cover, and really the big story was water, the actual headwaters, and where they're located and their density. So let me go on with that. And this is a very, how do we approach it? Okay, we create a comprehensive geodatabase. This is all the data that we think is necessary to develop a corridor strategy. And in the first column, we're identifying biodiversity and all the biodiversity assets in the region on maps, all to the same scale, so we can start to combine them and overlay them. And the hydrological features, and the fact that this whole thing is a karst landscape. We also start to look at connectors, and when we show water as least cost, we're not talking about money, we're talking about the ease of movement of species across water and across wetlands and through forests and fields. So we have this other layer of information, and within that we develop a model. It's a model where we can give different weightings to different factors, and we can come up with a series of scenarios of the best way animals can move between areas of high biodiversity. So it's this is a very simplistic view of the model. And then to help organize ourselves, as I said, the whole outer boundary is based on the watersheds. That is, all the water that is in this region flows into the Southern Georgian Bay area. So we have 5 watersheds, and we have the Big Head River and Meaford, and the Beaver Valley and Beige, and we have the Beaver, the Eugenia Lake, the Mad Rivers to the east, and then we have the shoreline watersheds. They're all very different. They all have different levels of forest cover, land use activities, and they represent kind of the foundation for looking for corridors. Now, the green areas here are, through our model, are the areas that we identified as being really highly important areas of high biodiversity, and the blue are just conceptual corridors that could be used to connect these areas. The Bruce Trail is shown in purple, so the watersheds are a very important way of analyzing the region. I think that one of the highlights is that when we look at Castle Glen, it's located exactly where 3 of the 5 watersheds meet. So it's really important as a headwater for 3 watersheds going down into Collingwood and flowing back through Beaver River. So that was rather interesting. And then we look at the satellite imagery, and just to get a sense of what this region is made up of, we have 60% of the land is in agriculture. And when you start to, that leaves 40% to do something in other than agriculture. So assuming that you keep the agriculture, if you take away the protected areas, the steep cliffs and the wetlands that are protected, and we're probably talking about 30% of this land is available for development. So it really points to trying to do more regenerative, resilient kind of agriculture, as well as doing better planning than what we're seeing. So this is an inset. You can see the geopark is the orange and red in the bottom inset map. So this shows you where the ECA corridor sits within the framework. This was one of the most surprising things. Since we had the elevation, the top topography and the elevations throughout the region, we knew where all the rivers were. We just kind of moved up the rivers to see where the water was sourced. Where did it all come from? So those blue dots on the map indicate all the headwaters within the region for every river and stream. And then we did a density analysis of those dots to say, well, these are the darkest blue are areas where you have the biggest recharge. And it's very interesting because if you look at the orange boundary, that's a proxy for the brow to toe of the escarpment. Most of these areas are right, the source waters are right on the escarpment. Either going north to the Georgian Bay or flowing back and around and back out to the bay through other ways. So that was really interesting. I don't think that those sources are protected beyond the Greenbelt and the Biosphere Reserve, but I don't think there's any particular attention being put on those. And then if you look at what those headwaters do, they support, of course, the ANSIs, the areas of natural scientific interest, the forest and the wetlands downstream. So it's not just protecting those downstream things, but the most important thing is to make sure we're protecting those areas. And of course, the headwaters support all the rivers and streams throughout the areas and support the communities, the towns and villages, Collingwood and Thornbury and Meaford downstream. So we have to really pay attention to that, to these source headwaters. So our model came up with this diagram. It's a schematic, but it's based on the models. And you can see the green represents the areas of highest biodiversity. The blue are the proposed corridors. So there's a whole network of potential corridors here. The one thing that we, because of the importance of the rivers and the source waters, is we put riparian corridors into this mix because the rivers and streams are naturally some of the most biodiverse areas in the region. And we're working with Mark Heaton and Corey Stinson, and it's really, their work has shown that the river valleys and the rivers are so important. So riparian corridors really need to be given a lot more attention than they have been. I just wanted to take a sidestep on this and then describe a situation. I was working on a World Bank project and CETA project in Malawi in 1994. And I was working with Dr. John Wilson, who's a fisheries expert and had been there, grew up there, went educated in the UK, and he said, Jim, did you know that every one of these rivers that we're seeing now flowed year-round, and all of them flowed into Lake Nyasa, or Lake Malawi, year-round. That meant that the women could get their water right there in their village. They could get their protein from the freshwater salmon when they moved upstream. And it was really an idyllic environment. Well, how did that happen? Well, the British were in power, and they had this two-chain regulation that you had to have 2 chains on each side of the riverbank. It's 133 feet, totally vegetated. You can't remove any of the vegetation. So 10 years later, 1994, when I was there, the rivers, very few rivers flowed into the lake. And what had happened is the deputy ministers and ministers who all had tobacco plantations decided to get rid of the buffer. They removed all the vegetation, and the first rain swept all the sand into the rivers, and the rivers became plugged up. There was no canopy on the trees or over the rivers to provide shade. So the results were women had to walk 4 hours each way to get water with a bucket on their head. They couldn't get water right there. There was no protein. And the level of poverty was just incredible. But just think 10 years by not managing that resource. So I think that that's something that I know the Blue Mountain Watershed Trust has been doing all kinds of work in this area, but I put a lot more emphasis on those corridors as well as the ECA corridors. Another story, I hate to kind of bring this up, but in the early 70s, I worked with a landscape architecture firm in downtown Toronto, Strong Moorhead, or Moorhead and Strong Moorhead, I guess. They had several names. Anyway, I was working on Fathom 5 Provincial Park and Grossmore National Park and the master plan for the CN Tower. But back in the office, other people were working on Castle Glen. And I didn't have anything to do with it. But I did go and look over their shoulders and looked at what they were doing. So they created the master plan, and they were using 1950, 1960 orthophotos and maps. And just think of the scale they were working at was 1 to 25,000, meaning 1 inch on the drawing was equal to 25,000 inches on the ground. And they were using elevations of about 10 feet. So, it made the land look like it was very easily built. It didn't look like there was many slopes whatsoever. So I came here 3 years ago, and I saw the master plan, and I said, wow, I think we may have a problem because it looks like it's about a 15% slope for the whole thing, because, that had prevailed. But Bruce took me for a hike, and we were walking down through the
important ecological biodiversity. Now, there are a lot of gaps on here, and this is something I think Jim alluded to. So one of the learnings from this exercise was that there's a lot of information that isn't in the provincial databases. That doesn't mean that we don't have. A lot of people, I think, live in this area right now. You've seen how rich the area is, we've got eagles flying around. We are very biodiversity rich, but not all of it has been captured, so we need to do some more work. So this map is not the corridor. And a year ago, I might have said, next year we're coming to you with a map of the corridor. Well, I was wrong. It could become a protected corridor, but right now, these are areas where there are existing natural corridors, but a lot of them are not protected. So this is information that we will use to guide and inform the work that we are doing. It does not mean that we won't do scientific research, we won't talk with landowners in other areas. We 100% will. There's a lot of extremely important areas of opportunity and ecological value that are not in these shaded areas, but they're just not in those provincial databases. So for example, all of the major rivers or riparian corridors, creeks and streams, those are all key corridors, and many of them are quite alive and healthy and active right now. And we'll get to that. And one more, if we add on our development hotspots that we're concerned about at Castle Glen and Talisman, you can see them there at scale. And again, Castle Glen, in this one, you can't see the watershed basin division, but it touches 3 different watershed basins, which makes it that hydrological apex that Jody talked about. And this isn't on the map, but hugely important. I think we have some friends from the Blue Mountain Watershed Trust here who were responsible for having the Silver Creek wetlands just on the west side of Collingwood identified as provincially significant wetlands, and that's something that we want to talk and do more with. And so a nod to them for all of their great work. This didn't pop up on the map I just showed you because those areas of important biodiversity were all compilations of multiple data layers. So Jim, often requiring maybe 10 data sets or something like that. So in this area, we know there's species at risk and significant wildlife habitat. However, they may not have had as many different documented layers to get them to pop up on the area. But we know, thanks to the Blue Mountain Watershed, that this is an important area. And so as an example, there could be some opportunities following Silver Creek and Black Ash Creek, down running, which both drain out of the Lake of the Clouds in Castle Glen, running down the slopes there and out to Silver Creek. So that could be an area that we are interested in exploring with landowners and municipalities there. So that's the mapping portion, and we can pull a couple up after during our Q&A. But now we'd like to talk about, and we are winding down on time here, what do we do with all this information? Where do we go from here?